Hey everyone, it's Justin here from CanadaWhips.com, and I'm really excited to share this video with you. In this tutorial, I will be teaching you how to make a basic hybrid whip from start to finish. This whip build is great for beginner to intermediate level crackers and is simple enough that anyone could make it. The whip is 5 feet long and is braided over a tapered and bound core. It has a 12 plait overlay and ends in a 2-point fall hitch. Don't worry if that doesn't make sense just yet. I will go through everything step by step as we get there. For now, let's look at the materials. For this whip, we will need 150 feet or 45 meters of nylon 550 paracord, a measuring tape, artificial sinew, which could be found at leather crafting stores. You could also use a very thin string or the inside strands of paracord. A pair of scissors. A pair of Hemostats would be really great, but you could also just use some tweezers and a clamp if you have one. I use a lacing needle to make my fall, but you could use a piece of wire from a coat hanger. Nail polish or a marker for marking the strands. A lighter. For this design, I will be dipping my whip in melted wax. This is optional, but it gives the whip more weight and makes it crack better in my opinion. If you want to wax your whip, you will need 5 or 6 pounds of paraffin wax and something to melt it in. I use this old slow cooker that I bought at a thrift store. Make sure it's big enough to fit your whip in. For the handle, you'll need 1/2 inch CPVC as well as a coupling and an end cap for it. I use tennis racket grip to make the handle more comfortable. You could use any type of athletic tape for that purpose. And finally, you'll need a drill to make a hole in the CPVC. Now that that's out of the way, let's start building the core of the whip. Basically, we're making a thick piece of rope that tapers down gradually. This will give our whip the shape that we want. We're going to start by cutting and folding a bunch of strands. We want the ends to all taper gradually. For the first strand, cut a piece of paracord at 48 inches. Then, take your nail polish and make a mark on that strand that is 8 inches from the end. When you are done, your strand should look like this. Now, let's make 5 more with different lengths. Strand 2 should be cut at 46 inches and marked at 10 inches. Strand 3 should be cut at 44 inches and marked at 12 inches. Strand 4 should be cut at 42 inches and marked at 14 inches. Strand 5 should be cut at 40 inches and marked at 16 inches. And finally, strand 6 should be cut at 38 inches and marked at 18 inches. Lay all of your strands out on the floor with the nail polish marks lined up. They should create a taper on both sides, like this. Next, we are going to make a loop for the whip to be braided on. This loop will eventually be used to connect the thong of the whip to the handle. To start, we need a long piece of paracord. The measurement isn't exact. I use 2 arm lengths of paracord. Next, we have to remove the inner strands of the piece that we just cut. Grab the little white strings and pull them to remove them from the cord. You may need to massage the cord a little in order to get them out. Now, tie your empty strand to a bar or a hook. You want it to be looped around so that you can pull fairly tightly on it without it coming off. Grab the pieces of paracord that we cut earlier and hold them right where the marks are. Thread these strands through the loop so that all of the markings are lined up with the piece of paracord they are going through. Take a small piece of string or sinew and tie a knot around the paracord to stop it from shifting. Make sure it's nice and tight so the marks don't slide off of the loop. Our next step is binding the core. This is going to help give the whip shape and keep some stability and rigidity inside of the whip. Take your sinew and attach it to the top of the core. I like to thread mine through the gap where the paracord is folded. Now we are going to start wrapping the sinew around the core of the whip. Wrap tightly so that the core feels firm but can still bend. Make sure that when you're wrapping, you're trapping the ends of the paracord underneath the binding. Remember, you want the core to taper evenly without any bumps. Once you are at about a third of the way down the core, start wrapping back up towards the top. The goal is to create as many little X shapes as possible, as you can see in this image. Once you reach the top, work your way back down again, making more X's. Then, continue down the whip until you are 2/3 wrapped. Go back up to where your X's are, and then back down again. Essentially, we're trying to go over the core in 3 layers of binding, creating as many X's as possible. Once you reach the last strand in your core, tie off the binding a few times so it won't move. Try not to create a large bumpy knot. Go over your core with scissors and a lighter, cutting and melting down the frayed parts of the paracord so that none are sticking out through the binding. Take the loop off of the hook and roll the whip on the ground. You can use a hard book or a piece of wood to get the whip rolled nice and round. For this video, I'm just using my hands and a yoga mat to create friction. Ultimately, you're just trying to get a nice round whip by rolling it on a hard surface. Okay, now it's time to construct the overlay. The overlay is the part of the whip that everyone can see, so it's important that it looks nice. We are going to braid the overlay out of 12 strands, removing 2 at a time until we get to the end of the whip. Let's start by cutting our strands. We're going to cut 6 strands that will be gutted and folded in half. The first strand is cut at 84 inches. Strand 2 is cut at 112 inches. Strand 3 is 140 inches. Strand 4 is 168 inches. Strand 5 is 192 inches. And strand 6 is 210 inches. Now we have to remove the strings from all of these pieces of paracord. On long strands it can be a little tough. First, grab all of the white strings from inside of the paracord. Pull them as far as you can. Once they've stopped moving, run your hand down the outside of the paracord to remove any bumps or kinks. Repeat this process until all of the string has been removed from every piece of paracord. Now, find the halfway point on each strand and make a prominent fold so you can identify it. Then, lay all of the strands on the ground so that the halfway points are beside each other. Again, when you look at the ends of the strands, you should see a slight taper. Grab all of the strands and lay the halfway points across your finger. It doesn't matter what order you pick up the strands, just make sure you're holding them all at the halfway mark. Come back to the core with your overlay strands. Wrap the strands around the core and the piece of paracord that is attaching it to the rod. Make sure that the halfway point on all of the strands is touching the back of your core. Cross the halves in front so that you have fully wrapped the core. Do your best to flatten out the strands on each side so they aren't on top of each other. Now we are going to start plaiting, or braiding, our whip. Look at the half that is on top and notice how, on my whip, the bottom strand is pointing up and to the left. This means we need to grab the top strand from the left side. Take that strand and wrap it around the back of the whip. Split the strands on the right and pull the strand you're holding under 3 and over 3. When I pull a strand through, I like to run my hand along that side of the whip in order to help the strands stop from being tangled. Essentially, we're just repeating this process all the way down the whip. Again, if you look at the strand that's on top at the bottom, it's pointing up and to the right. So I'll be taking the top strand from the right side and bringing it around the back and going under 3 and over 3. When you pull tightly and try and make sure that everything stays neat and in line with itself. Again, we're looking, pointing up and to the left. Take the top strand from the left and bring it under 3 and over 3. I learned this method from watching videos by Nick Schrader on his YouTube channel, Nick's Whip Shop. You should check it out if you want to learn how to make a whole variety of different whips. The top right strand will go under 3 and over 3. If you look again, up and to the left, the top left strand comes around the back and it goes under 3 and over 3. When I'm plaiting, I'm trying to keep all of the strands together so there's no gaps in between them. So sometimes I might have to nudge one up a little, but basically I want the sides of the paracord to always be touching. When the paracord's going around the back, it's also important to keep this in mind. So I'll kind of feel with my fingers where the paracord is in order to put it in the right spot. Up and to the left, under 3 and over 3. Pull nice and tight. And you can see we're starting to get the herringbone pattern here, where all of the strands are coming down at about a 45-degree angle. Once I've done a few passes, I like to pull on all of the strands to tighten them up. Up and to the right, top right goes under 3 and over 3. If at any point you want to take a break from plaiting, you can grab your hemostats or your clamp and clamp the strands on the side that's on the top. This will save your spot, and then you can come back, retighten everything, and continue going. Now it's time to drop our first 2 strands. Dropping a strand means removing it from the plait of the whip. So we've been plaiting with 12 strands, 6 on each side, and now we're going to drop 2 strands and continue plaiting with 10 strands, 5 on each side. We know it's time to drop a strand when one of the strands is becoming short. We don't want it to be so short that it's impossible to plait it or pull tightly, but we do want it to be short enough that we know that after 1 or 2 more braids with it, the strand will disappear. Plait until one of those strands is on the top and ready to be braided. Look for the shortest strand on the other side so that you know which of the other strands you're going to be dropping as well. Braid the first short strand normally. Put it around the back and go under 3 and over 3. The next strand, on my whip in this case, is also the short strand. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bring it around the back and I'm going to go under 3 and over 3. I'm going to pull it tight because I want to secure the other short strand underneath it. Now we're going to braid the next strand over as if nothing has changed, and also we're going to braid the next strand over as if nothing has changed. The next one is also going under 3 and over 3. And now we're going to take our short strands, we're going to give them a little tug, and then we're going to pull them downwards so that they're in line with the core of the whip. Essentially, we're turning these strands into part of our core. So locate both of them and just give them a nice tug and then pull them down so that they're nice and straight with the core. Now we have 5 strands on each side. We're going to braid as if those other 2 strands aren't even there. If you look, we have a strand pointing up and to the left. I'm going to grab it, and now I'm going to pull it under 3 and over 2. Now I have a strand pointing up and to the right, so I'm going to pull it under 3 and over 2. Up to the left, under 3 over 2, And I'm just braiding over the strands that we've dropped. I've dropped them into the core. And also, because they're two slightly different lengths, this is going to help with the taper of the whip. And we're just going to continue on braiding this way until we reach our next strand drop. Don't worry if your two strands that need to be dropped happen exactly one after the other, just like mine. Just make sure that once you've dropped the shortest strand on one side, the first chance you get, you drop the shortest strand on the other side. And all you do to drop a strand is braid the strand normally, put a few strands over top of it, and then once you've secured it down, pull it down straight so that it's in line with the core, and then braid over it as if it's not there. It's time to drop our second set of strands. If you look, I have a short strand on top at the left, and on the right I have a short strand that's second from the top. So I'm just going to braid as normally. I'll take the short strand and I'm going to go under 3 and over 2. And I'm going to take the strand from the right and also go under 3 over 2. Take the top strand from the left, under 3 over 2. Really making sure it's helping to secure those strands down. And now I'm going to grab the short strand from the right side and put that under 3 over 2. Take the top strand from the left, under 3 and over 2. Pull it tight. Now both of my short strands are nice and secure. So I'm going to pull the shortest one down so it's straight in line with the core. And then I'm just going to do an extra little braid here to make sure that everything is nice and safe. And it's going to go under 2 and over 2. That's our new pattern for 8 plait. Under 2 strands and over 2 strands. Now I'm going to pull the short strand on the right side downwards so that I have 4 strands on each side. I'm going to take the top strand from the left and I'm going to go under 2 and over 2. And now I'm plaiting an 8 plait, 4 strands on each side. So under 2 over 2 on the left here, pulled nice and tight, and then under 2 over 2 on the right side. We're going to continue braiding like this until we've reached the end of our core. Now that we've reached the end of our core, it's time to go into 6 plait. If you look, you should have some strands that are pretty short, almost ready to be dropped, if not completely ready to be dropped. We're going to do the exact same thing that we've been doing before, but this time the strands won't just be added to the core, they're going to become the core. So I braid as normally. I go under 2 over 2 on both sides. I go under 2 over 2 again. Pull nice and tight. And now I pull down my 2 short strands, get them nice and lined up. And now I'm in 6 plait. I have 3 strands on each side. And the new pattern is under 2 and over 1. Pull tight. Under 2 over 1. And I'm braiding this around the 2 strands that we just dropped because I'm pretending that those 2 strands are the core. I guess I'm not pretending, those 2 strands actually are the core. At least they've become a part of it. We need to make sure that our new core is the right length. Grab your measuring tape and make sure that the longer of the 2 strands that you've just dropped is about 21 centimeters or 8 inches. If it's longer than that, cut it down to 8 inches. And if it's shorter, that's okay. Braid until you reach the end of the new core. Once you've reached the end of the new core, it's time to drop from 6 strands to 4 strands. As usual, locate the shortest 2 strands and braid them as normally. Under 2 over 1 and under 2 over 1. These short strands again are going to become a part of our core, but only briefly. Now that both of the short strands are on the bottom, I'm going to treat them just like a core, and I'm going to change my pattern from 6 plait into 4 plait. In 4 plait, we go under 1 and over 1. My first few passes look like I'm going under 1 and over 2, but that's just because my short strands are actually now a part of my core. So if you look, I pull tight, and now I have 2 strands on each side, and I have 2 strands dangling down at the bottom. I'm going under 1 over 1, pretending that the strands at the bottom aren't there, and under 1 over 1 on that side, braiding around the 2 strands that I just dropped. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut those 2 strands quite short and with a little bit of a taper, but not so short that I'm not going to be braiding over them for a few more passes. So I cut the first one at maybe 1 inch, and I cut the second one at double that length. And then I continue braiding under 1 and over 1. I'm going to continue braiding in 4 plait until I reach 52 inches or 133 centimeters from the beginning of the whip. That's when it's time to drop from 4 strands to 3. Now we're going to begin the twisted section of our whip. If you look, I make sure that my shortest strand is at the top. Take the 2 strands on one side and twist them towards you. Then take the 1 long strand on the other side and twist it away from you. And then after that, wrap them around each other in the opposite way that you were twisting. So as you can see, I twist them both one way and then I wrap them around the other way. This will make a nice twisted effect where 1 strand is wrapping around the other 2 twisted strands. You're really trying to twist the strands tightly together, but not so tight that they're kinking up. After you've done this for a few inches, it's time to switch from 3 strands twisting to 2. To do this, grab the longer strand from the side that has 2 strands and continue holding the 1 strand on the other side. We're going to do the exact same thing where we twist the strands the same direction and then twist them around each other in the opposite direction. Pull the 3rd strand that we're leaving behind out of the way, and you'll see that it stays secured in place by the other twists that you've just made. Continue this 2-strand twist until you've reached 5 feet or 60 inches or 150 centimeters. Then clamp the 2 strands with your hemostats. Now it's time to get rid of the 2 strands that we left dangling out of the whip earlier. You want to cut them nice and short and then melt them so that they're flush with the thong of your whip. Now it's time to make your fall. You're going to need your lacing needle and a piece of paracord that's cut at about 36 inches or 90 centimeters. Remove all of the insides of the paracord. Then cut the strand at a steep angle on one side. You want it to look almost pointy. Melt that pointy side into a nice sharp point. Take the pointy side and thread it into the lacing needle by placing it in the back end and then twisting the lacing needle as if you're screwing on a lid. The paracord should be nice and snug inside of the lacing needle. Find the halfway point of your cord and poke the lacing needle inside of the paracord. we're going to thread the paracord through itself, and this is going to help create a loop in the bottom of the whip and make our fall. It also makes the paracord more thick, which will be good because it'll give more weight to your fall. Depending on how thick your paracord is, this might be a little bit tough. We're just pushing the needle into the paracord and trying to get it to come out at the end on the other side. I've reached the other end of my paracord, and now I pull the lacing needle out. The loop that's formed on the other side of the paracord is how we're going to attach the fall to our whip. Now it's time to tie a 2-point fall hitch. To do this, take your loop and put it over the thong of your whip, pulling the 2 strands through. I like to add a few more twists just in case I lose some of the length that I've created when I'm tying the fall. Once your fall is on the thong, make the loop a little bit smaller by pushing the paracord up towards itself. You want it to be able to move a little bit, but still be relatively snug. Right, with your fall at the back of the thong, go around the back and through the space between the thong and the fall. Do that with both pieces of paracord. Then pull everything nice and tight. Now we're going to open a hole by poking our lacing needle through the loop of the fall. Make enough space that you can pull a piece of paracord through. Grab one strand of paracord and wrap it around the back of the thong, and then pull it through the hole that you've just created using your hemostats or your tweezers. Do this for both strands and pull them nice and tight. Then pull your fall tight and make sure everything is secure. If you want a more in-depth video on how to tie this hitch, there's a detailed video by Dakota Winrich of Dakitty Whips on YouTube. I'll put a link to that video in the description below. Now that your fall hitch is tied, we can cut the 2 strands from the thong short. We don't want them to be super short, but we do want them to be short enough that they're not interfering or getting caught up with our fall. I like to keep mine at about 2 or 3 inches. The main portion of our whip is now done. We're going to do some work to clean it up. I like to go over my whip and make sure that there's no strands or any fuzz from the paracord sticking out of the braiding. If there is, I'll take my lighter and I'll melt it down. I also melt down the ends of the fall hitch and the end of the fall just so that it doesn't fray when I'm cracking. Take your whip back to the floor and you're going to give it another nice roll. This roll will help even out the plaiting. It'll make the whip nice and round, and it'll make it crack really well. Rolling your whip is a really important step because it helps fix any minor mistakes or bumps and just makes the whip fly much nicer in the air. Now it's time to make our handle. I've taken my piece of 1/2 inch CPVC and I've cut it at 16 inches or 40 centimeters. I also have the coupling and the end cap, which I'll put on the handle now. We're going to use our drill to drill a hole in the handle so that we can pull our strands through and secure the whip to the handle. Drill a hole underneath the end of the coupling. Next, you'll be taking your grip tape and wrapping the handle with it. This is what your handle should look like when it's finished. Now I'm going to wax my whip. This step is optional, but it does add a lot of weight to your whip and helps the braiding get even tighter. I start by taking my wax and I put it in my slow cooker. I want to heat it up until the wax is about 200 degrees Fahrenheit or 92 degrees Celsius. Now I'll take the thong of my whip and I'll put it all inside of the wax. Depending on the size of your slow cooker, it can be hard to get the whip fully immersed in wax, so I like to use a stick or a metal screwdriver to push the thong underneath the wax so that it's entirely submerged. When the whip is submerged in wax, you'll see that bubbles are coming out of the braiding. This means that the air is being removed from the whip and being replaced with wax, which is what you want. You know that your whip is done being waxed when there's no more bubbles. Now that the whip has stopped bubbling, it's time to remove it from the wax. I grabbed some paper towel and I also grabbed the strands that were hanging the whip from the wall. I pull on those strands and run the paper towel along the whip, removing any excess wax from the outside of the thong. The whip is very, very hot, so make sure you don't burn yourself and you're very careful. Run the paper towel over the whip a few times, squeezing to make sure that you're getting any excess wax and soaking it into the paper towel. Then, lay your whip somewhere safe to dry. I like to let my whip dry for 24 hours after it's been waxed. Now it's time to attach the thong to the handle. To do this, you're going to need your hemostats or a pair of tweezers. Take the 2 long strands and thread them into the PVC. We're going to want to pull them with our tweezers through the hole that's inside of the handle. This can be a little tricky. An easier way is to take one of the little strings from the inside of a piece of paracord and tie it to the ends of the strands and pull them through the hole that way. For this video, I just used the tweezers. Once you have the strands through the hole in the handle, pull really tightly. You want the thong to sit nice and flush inside of the coupling, and you don't want it to be able to be pulled out. It's okay if it swivels, but you don't want it to be able to be removed from the coupling by pulling on it. You might need to massage it to get it inside if you need to. Pull really tight on the strands and get it nice and secure inside of the handle. Next, we're going to tie a French grapevine. Midwest Whips has a really great video of this on their YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description below. To tie a grapevine, wrap the strands around the handle of the whip and then pull them through the loop that you just created. This first knot is going to be holding the whip in place, so you want to make sure it's nice and tight. Pull it really tightly away from the hole, and then pull it back towards the hole. Make sure that your strands are in place and there's no gaps between them as well. So you see I pull away, and then I pull back towards the hole. We're going to do the same thing multiple times. So again, I go around the handle and then through the loop that I created. I make sure all of the strands are nice and touching. I pull away from the knot and then back towards it. Do this 8 or 9 times until you have a nice little grapevine knot that's going around the handle of your whip. Make sure you tie the last knot on your grapevine nice and tight as well. Then cut the strands so they're nice and short and melt them into the paracord. You don't want them to be able to move. This will secure your grapevine and finish off the whip. All that's left to do is to attach your cracker. Now, I haven't described how to make a cracker in this video because there's plenty of tutorials for that online. I'll link to some below. To attach the cracker to the whip, untwist the loop at the end so you make a little hole. Thread the fall through that hole. Then twist the cracker back up so that it's tight. Next, you're going to want to loop the fall around itself, and then you want to pull the cracker through that loop. And then pull tight. Make sure that the fall doesn't go through the loop that you created. Only the cracker does. This will secure the cracker nicely onto the end of your whip. And that's it. All that's left to do is test the whip that you just created. Thanks for watching this video, and good luck making your first hybrid whip. For more whip information, check out CanadaWhips.com.